Hello and welcome back to How to Roleplay Star Trek Adventures Edition. Episode 4 is all about combat. It's gonna be a little bit longer episode. That's because combat in Star Trek Adventures is considered to be a little bit complicated, but that is kind of, depends on perspective. In Star Trek Adventures, the developers tried to implement combat in a very native way, other than in games like D&D. In D&D, for instance, you might be playing a simplistic but okay role-playing game, then combat starts and everyone gets their little plastic dolls out, a battle map is put on the table, and suddenly you have to understand attack rolls, which are not skill rolls, even though they rely on attributes as skills did, but they're just not quite the same. Then suddenly there are standard actions and minor actions and stuff you've never heard before. So it feels like two games tagged together. In Star Trek Adventure, it's more organic. The trouble is, if you start reading combat rules in Star Trek Adventures, you will be sidelined so often to other spots in the game. You will suddenly have to read, well, battle maps, of course, but then suddenly you need to know exactly what opposed tasks are, how teamwork works, what complications are, extended tasks, you need to learn about those. They are a little bit more complicated to learn. And then you're still not done. You will be reading about conflicts. And only then you can start to understand how attacks work, what damage does, and what the heck these challenge dices do. And there are more and more things you will be referred to before you actually can do anything in combat. So because this can be very frustrating to learn about when reading the book and jumping back and forth, I will do this in a way that I think is more intuitive, starting up with the basics and then putting everything together. You will find that then all the puzzle pieces will pretty much fall into place. Let's start with an easy one, Battlemaps. If you've played D&D, Pathfinder and similar games, you probably have seen something like this. This is a battle map I made with Dungeon Alchemist. It looks really nice and it's fun to play on a detailed and cool looking battle map. I grant you that for sure, but it is a bit work intense. Some people ignore battle maps altogether, theater of a mind kind of thing, or you can just download random battle maps from the internet, be very crude in your battle maps to save up some work, or you do it like I do, reduce the number of encounters and then make cool battle maps for the few encounters that you do. It's pretty much up to you, but probably if you want to get all or the most of encounters with battle maps, then you will spend quite some time either searching for battle maps or drawing them yourselves. Battle maps in Star Trek Adventures, and they do serve a purpose. You know where you are, what your character can see, what is in range, where you could move to use the terrain to your advantage. This is basically the purpose of battle maps. Give you a good idea about your surrounding, what your character could do, where he's in danger, where they are safer, and so on and so forth. Battle maps in Star Trek Adventures can look a bit more simplistic, a bit like this, for instance. Assume you on a spaceport, there's a ship that has landed, or it's your ship, and there is a fight breaking out around the ship. There is cargo stored there, or cargo being loaded or unloaded. There are storage buildings. There is a flight control tower, and that's pretty much it. You don't need really hex spaces or squares or anything like this, because your characters move relatively slowly compared to like the range of your weapons. If you can run, I don't know, a few yards per turn, but your weapon shoots hundreds of yards, then counting 5-foot squares is just obnoxious. So distances can be a bit more abstract depending on terrain and stuff like this. Also, you just don't need to know if someone is I don't know, 300 feet away or 320 feet away. It probably doesn't make a huge difference anyways. This type of battle map, you might know similar battle maps or similar maps from games like Fate. They can look very crude like this, but you can of course fancy it up a bit by getting a cool picture and then just draw on it, right? Since exact distances are not really that relevant, just grab anything that kind of looks the way you want it, and then just put in the lines that separate the individual territories, and label that. So that's, from the work perspective, much easier and pretty much serves the same purpose, especially in a science fiction kind of setting, as I said, where probably most of the combat will be ranged and distances can be a bit more abstract. As I said before, in order to properly understand combat, we need to lay some groundwork. One of the rules we need to understand is opposed tasks. Very simple. Two characters try to do the same thing, but success is mutually exclusive. Only one of them can succeed. Both of them basically roll dice with the same difficulty. Both use the same attribute and discipline usually, and whoever has the most the most successes wins. Very straightforward. In case of a tie, the character who initiated the task wins. And in case of both failing their task, nothing really happens. If both characters have successes, then the winner gets momentum, and that is the difference of the number of successes. An example, let's assume Ducat and Kira sit at the same table. There's a weapon on the table. There's an argument, and suddenly Ducat reaches for the weapon. Kira was paying attention, so she was ready to also grab the weapon. So we have a post-task scenario. Only one of them can actually get the weapon. Both roll on, in this case, let's say daring and security, difficulty 0. Difficulty 0 because you should be able to actually get the weapon if nothing opposes you there. Right, then Ducat rolls just one success. Don't care about the exact numbers of daring, security, and what he rolled. Kira, let's say she spent momentum and rolled really nice, and she gets 3 successes. That means not only does Kira get the weapon, she also receives 2 momentum, 3 minus 1, and the conflict, the opposed task is over. The next cornerstone we need for combat is teamwork. I said it in the first video. It is very unlikely that everyone is just bashing down on their individual enemy. More likely you will try to work together to accomplish a task. So there are 2 types of helping out your teammate. One is the assist task, which creates additional successes if the task that you are assisting succeeds. Basically, you roll a task. Every success you do will be added to the successes of the person you assist if they succeed with their task. If they fail, your successes are lost. Basically, picture a cheerleader. The football player is trying to score a goal, score a touchdown rather. Said football. No, doesn't matter. Score a point. So they roll fitness plus whatever, and the cheerleader rolls, I don't know, whatever you roll for cheerleading. So it's a different task. And if the football player succeeds, then the successes of the cheerleader will be added to that in order to, I don't know, cheer up the crowd or whatever it is that they do. Opposing, so it makes successful things more successful, but it doesn't help you actually succeed. The thing that helps you succeed is the create an advantage task. Again, you roll a check that is not necessarily the same one than the person you try to help with. The difficulty by default is 2. If you succeed, you create an advantage, hence the name. Advantages have their traits, or like situational traits to be more precise, the same thing as aspects in Fate. Anyone who played Fate basically knows this create an advantage kind of thing already. The most basic thing you can do is you can reduce the difficulty of a task by 1. So it makes it easier to succeed, and if the person succeeds, usually their net successes will be increased by 1 or 2, right? But that's it. It's not going to give you more than 1 additional success. So you basically always have to decide, well, is my buddy going to succeed on their own? Then I want to assist him so he succeeds better or stronger or more, whatever. Or is my ally probably going to fail? Then I should try to create an advantage to make it easier for him to actually accomplish their task. Slightly unintuitively, the opposite of an advantage is not called a disadvantage, but a complication. Every time on a check you roll a 20, you cause a complication. As I said, it's basically just the opposite of an advantage. It can make things impossible afterwards. It can just decrease or increase the difficulty on further tasks. It will not affect the task you just did, but anything afterwards. The complication is created once the task is finished. You can also increase something that is called the complication range. Oh my goodness. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen in combat. That's why I'm pointing it out. If the complication range for a task is increased, that basically increases the chance of causing a complication. In other games, it's the botch range, or well, in D&D there's only a critical range. Usually the botch range is not increased. Anyway, so if the default complication range is increased by 1, you cause a complication not only by a 20, but by a 90 or 20, and then 18, 90, 20, and so on and so forth. 16 is the furthest it can go. As I said, it's not a rule that you need a whole lot, but it can very much happen in combat. So that's why we talk about it. One of the last things, and unfortunately one of the more complicated things to understand before delving into combat, is extended tasks. The name suggests already it's a task that cannot be accomplished with just one single dice roll. So what you need here is something called work and something called magnitude. Work basically tells you how many successes you need to create a breakthrough, and magnitude tells you how many breakthroughs you need to complete the extended task. There's also something called resistance, which we'll need as well, that reduces the number of work created with every single check. And whenever you either achieve 5 work with a single task, or you fill up the work track, i.e. the number of successes required to create a breakthrough, you gain a breakthrough. You can even gain 2 breakthroughs if you score 5 work in one go and fill up the work track. As soon as you have at least as many breakthroughs as the extended task has magnitude, you complete the task. Sounds a little convoluted. Let's have a look at an example. In our example, the warp drive broke, as it usually does. Unfortunately, there are hostile Klingons coming, and we only have a limited amount of time to fix the warp drive. Now, the GM rules that it's a reason plus engineering check to repair the warp drive, and it's difficulty 1. It's yeah, the thing breaks so often that it's kind of standard issue for the engineers to repair it. But as I said, it's severely damaged. Will take several attempts to make it work again, and there is only a limited amount of time. So the GM rules that the work track has 10 points. The resistance is 1. For whatever reason he wrote that. You don't need to have a resistance here. Let's say maybe there is something else going on. Probably fires erupt due to damaged conduits or whatever. And the magnitude is 4. Each attempt will take 1 hour, and the Klingons are scheduled to be there in, I don't know, 6 or 8 hours or something like that. Right. So on our first turn, the engineer succeeds on the reason plus engineering difficulty 1 check and rolls challenge dice and ends up with 3 points on the challenge dice, which is the total work done. The total work done will be reduced by 1 for the resistance of the extended task. That gives us 2 work, meaning our work track has 8 more slots for our first breakthrough. Doesn't look great so far. 1 hour gone and we don't even have a breakthrough yet. On the second turn, the engineer puts in a little more effort, rolls, has more luck on rolling dice, so he ends up with 6 total work scored. Great. 6 total work means if I reduce the total work by 1, I'll get still 5 total 5 work, which is already a breakthrough. Moreover, I only need 3 more for another breakthrough. This is great progress. We need again 4 breakthroughs in total. We already have 1. The second one is due relatively soon, so this might actually work out all right. By default, the number of challenge dice you roll is 2, plus the involved discipline, in our case engineering. Not super important, we won't use that in combat too much, at least. Now really the last thing we need to cover before getting into combat is conflicts and initiative. Again, the Fate players will feel quite at home around now, because it's basically the same rule as in Fate. Conflicts in Star Trek Adventure are a generic term for any situation where 2 parties try to achieve something mutually exclusive, similar to a contested role where only 2 characters try to do the same. Here it might be a race, a open debate, or like a court case between 2 parties, but it also could mean a combat scenario. Right, so one important thing is that this whole thing, conflict, usually takes place in turns. Everyone takes their turn, then passes on to the next player or character. Who starts the whole thing? Well, for many GMs, their favorite thing to say is everyone roll for initiative. So how do we roll initiative in Star Trek Adventures? Well, we don't. There is no initiative roll in Star Trek Adventures. Why is that? Well, hand shot first. I know, wrong franchise, don't sue me. If one character initiates a conflict, that character should go first. Simple as that. If Han says, I shoot, or the player of Han says he shoots, then you shouldn't roll initiative and realize that the bartender actually goes first, and then everyone on Han's team, and Han, because he rolled bad, is the last person to go. Like that would make no sense. If both parties kind of initiate the conflict about the same time, let's say it's a court case, for instance, then the PCs go first, usually, just because it's more fun. Then the GM decides which character goes first if there is a good reason for a specific character to go first. If there is no good reason why someone should start the whole thing, then it is decided by the daring score. Whoever has the highest daring is probably going to jump in and act first. And after one character took their turn, the turn was passed over to a member of the opposite team. Until everyone has had their turn, no one can have more than one turn per round. The exception is you can seize the initiative or keep the initiative by paying momentum 2 points, but only once before a member of the opposing team then gets their turn to do stuff. All right. Now we are pretty much set up. We can now look at actions and conflicts, which will be pretty much the same things you do in a combat situation. You have minor actions, similar as in D&D, only that here they're not just for combat, they're for any conflict. You get 1 per turn for free, you can buy more for momentum, and you get 1 task for free. Again, you can, under certain circumstances, buy more. Minor actions include moving, interacting with objects, and a bunch more things I don't want to cover right now. Another important thing, however, is aim. If you don't move, if you don't interact with anything, if you don't do anything fancy in combat, you might want to just aim. Tasks are a bit more. We have to go there a little bit more into detail. So tasks basically are the same thing as standard actions in D&D and similar things. So you can buy another second task or second action per turn, but it costs you quite a bit. Determination only if you have a value that would allow you to do so, and momentum also under certain circumstances. The tasks that you can do, one very important one is the guard task. I know in plenty of games this is a bit scoffed at. I don't know how often anyone in a D&D game I was part of used actually guard, forgoing your attack in order to make it slightly more difficult to hit someone else, to hit one of your allies. But here the guard action is for once very, very powerful. It makes it way more difficult to hit someone, and especially if you have one person who's really good at fighting and needs to reposition themselves, or is going to be targeted one very important character, you can do something like give cover fire, and this is, as I said, very, very powerful. The standard scene with Riker dashing across the battlefield, and not being hit by anyone just because his buddies are firing a bit left and right. This is basically what guard does. You have assist, and of course you have create an advantage. We talked about this before, and I mentioned this in the first video. When it comes to combat, it's likely that you have one person who's really good at fighting and at least one or two people who are probably not great, so they might rather assist than shoot with their phases without achieving any success at all. And of course, there's making an attack. There are also other things you can do, but well, you'll find this in the books, and we don't need to cover this in order to understand properly how combat works. Well, and this is about the point where everything is supposed to fall into place. Let's have a look. How would you do an attack? Well, if it's a melee attack, then you roll daring plus security, difficulty 1, and this is an opposed check. If you succeed, you hit your enemy. If you fail, you don't. Let's make an example. Crewman Redshirt attacks a Klingon. He has daring 10 and security 2. The Klingon defends with the same attributes, but he has daring 12 and security 5. Our friend Redshirt rolls with his 2d20 a 15 and a 7. The Klingon 13 and 16. That means the Klingon has 2 successes. Poor Redshirt only 1. That means not only is the Klingon not grappled, but also he gains 1 momentum. Oh boy, that was a bad idea. But that's the reason why he wouldn't probably do something like that. Ranged attacks are a little easier. They are just a task on control and security, difficulty 2, no opposed task. If you hit, you hit. But the difficulty is increased for enemies in range of the attacker. Usually that means if you're in melee or someone really close nearby, it's a little more difficult to concentrate on shooting. Also, the complication range is increased if there are further targets in range of the guy you shoot at. Usually that means in the area you shoot at there are friends and enemies, which makes it more likely that you hit the wrong person. If you hit someone, you do damage, usually. How do you do this? Well, welcome back our challenge dices. You roll challenge dice is equal to the base damage of the attack. The defender rolls challenge dice according to their resistance. Usually that means cover. And they add their static resistance, which usually means their armor. The net successes is the number of damage that is taken. That is written down on the character sheet as stress. 5 or more stress means the target suffers an injury. Same goes if the stress is reduced to below 0, and injury means the character is out of combat. For example, let's take crewman Redshirt again. This time he tries to shoot the Klingon. He has control 10, security 3. I think these are different values than last time. Doesn't matter. The Klingon has an armor of 2 and for some reason a probably invisible cover of 1. So crewman Redshirt rolls his d20s and rolls 1 and a 12. That is great because 1 is 2 successes, 12 is 1 success, means he has 3 successes against the difficulty of 2. 1 net success means he not only hits, he also creates 1 point of momentum. Awesome. Now he can roll dice for damage. He takes his challenge dice, 3 for the type 2 phaser. It's just something that is written down in the stats for the phaser, and 3 more because he's using the discipline security. He gets bonus dice. Well, he gets the 3 for security as bonus dice. The phaser has a piercing 2 quality. We'll talk about this in a moment. His challenge dices result are 0, 1, 1 plus effect, 2, 0, 0, while the Klingon rolls 1, challenge dice for his cover rolls 1. That leaves us with 4 points of damage from the 6 challenge dices of crewman Redshirt. The Klingon has an armor of 2, rolled up a 1 with his cover roll, so he has 3 armor grand total, but the phaser has piercing 2, so that is reduced to 1 resistance. That means our Klingon loses 3 points of stress. Great. And now you can see why we spend so much time on stuff like extended tasks. Extended tasks is basically the same as combat, where work is the same as stress. You want to achieve as much work as the opponent has points on his their stress track. Magnitude, okay, that is not super obvious. Maybe lives of the enemy you fight or the number of enemies, that's probably a bit more abstract, but resistances reduce damage as they did before when they reduced work. Breakthroughs are just the same as injury, and the number of challenge dice you roll in extended task was 2 plus the discipline involved, and in combat it's the weapon damage plus security, because security is just that discipline. And that's almost it. Last thing I want to talk about is how to recover stress, really briefly. Well, you can recover stress during combat by taking a breath. There you use momentum to recover some of your stress. It is fully recovered after combat, after you took something like a short rest in D&D. So stress is usually recovered really swiftly. Injuries, however, are a huge problem. You need to be treated with first aid at the end of, or during the combat, or at the end of combat, in order to be stabilized, and then, well, healing takes time or some medical facility. One more example where we put everything together and include the teamwork. Again, take our Super Klingon from the first video. This guy now has no cover, but a resistance of 6. He has a massive armor plus force field. So with an average of slightly less than 1 from a challenge die, you can calculate that relatively easily. Even with 6 challenge dies, it's likely that you will not pass through the resistance. So you need to work together. Let's say crewman A is a great wrestler, so he wants to assist our guy with the phaser by grappling the Klingon and get him into line of fire. The GM rules that this is indeed a fitness plus security check, but the difficulty should be at least 1. He ends up with 3 successes, so there are 2 successes left over to improve the final shot by 2 additional successes. Right, the crewman B is not really the fighter type, so they decide to try to create an advantage. Here they're tying the shoelaces together, distracting, being trying more the social angle with presence and comm maybe. Probably a better setup would have been if they used that tricorder to try to weaken the force field somehow, but I didn't feel like drawing a new image here. With that, now crewman C fires. Shooting is control plus security, usually difficulty 2, but due to the advantage created by crewman B, it's only a difficulty 1. They should succeed. If they do so, then all the extra successes are turned into momentum. That includes the 2 extra successes from crewman A, only in case of crewman C actually succeeding with their role of control and security. So let's say they succeed and have 2 successes. 1 is reduced by difficulty 1. They have 1 net success. Because they succeeded, they get the 2 additional successes from crewman A, 3 net successes, meaning they get 3 momentum, and you can use momentum to buy additional challenge dice when you roll for damage. Awesome. So now they have, as an example before, 6 challenge dice from 3 from the phaser, 3 from the security. Buy another 3 for a total of 9. So now the chances are, the odds are in their favor. They're probably going to injure the Klingon. If all of them had just fired their phasers individually at the Klingon, the resistance of 6 would probably had negated the entire damage. It would have been entire waste of a round. This way, by working together, even though only one of them fired a phaser, the Klingon was injured. Great. This is all you really need to understand combat. There is more stuff that could show up, obviously. So we didn't take into account the fact that complication range in our example should have been increased, or the example from the first video, because there are crewmen in range of the attack against the Klingon. Also, I only mentioned briefly 1 weapon quality piercing. There's also the way of using momentum to avoid injury that is important. We didn't talk about how far you can actually move. There's terrain and hazards and complications, of course. So there is more to the whole story about combat, but with the stuff that we talked about so far, you get the main idea, and the rest is details and polishing. If you still don't quite feel super competent and confident to go through an encounter, if you want to read up on this once more, I strongly suggest you start by reading on contested tasks. If you understand that well, figure out how extended tasks work, because as I pointed out before, they are basically the core essence of an encounter. Then conflicts, that's just half a page or so, mostly about initiative. For a good and fun combat encounter, you should always be aware of how assist and create an advantage works, how teamwork works, and then it's really just weapons and armor, their stats, and you're done. Then you should be able to go through a full combat encounter. That's it from me again. I plan on doing one more video on starships and space combat. If you feel like I've left out some important things about Star Trek Adventures, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll wish you a good time and hope to see you again in the next video, and probably one of the last ones. See you then. Goodbye.